Jeffrey, I'm so excited to do this.
Alicia, this has been a long time coming. It's really good.
This is the first book I have read in, you're in very, very short list of company, in there with Toni Morrison and Zora Neale Hurston with a book that I'm dying to read again.
Oh.
It truly is life-changing.
Wow.
So my second reading really gets to be with you today.
Well, thank you.
I'm unbelievably excited. You decided to write a book that captured the theory of everything. Why?
Well, I like to write, first of all. My dissertation was on a Renaissance poem, but the theme of the dissertation was strategies for living. And really, the Infinite Staircase, one way you can think about it is a framework for framing your strategy for living. And all the business books I've written were about frameworks. They were all about trying to size up a situation. And the key with strategy is you got to size up the situation before you prescribe the response. Most bad strategy books just prescribe the response and say, apply it, universally. So I was very sensitive to the notion of, no, you've got to describe the situation before you prescribe the response. That's what led to dividing the book into metaphysics and ethics. So metaphysics is like, what's the situation? And ethics is, what do you do about it? Well, the metaphysics part, there's this incredible story about how we got 13.8 billion years ago, there was a big bang, and you and I are sitting in your parents' living room, today. Well, how do you get from there to here? And it turns out there's a lot of really good ideas about them, but they're stuck in silos. So the astrophysicists will tell you a really interesting set of stories, and the microbiologists will tell you an incredible set of stories about how life emerges, and the social scientists and the Darwinists will tell you how you evolved from single cells to people, and then the literary critics will telling you about narratives and analytics and whatever. And I just felt like, but how would you string that together? What's the picture? And so the staircase, and in the middle of that, I should say also, in the reading I was doing, I started reading a lot about Darwinism because it felt like business and Darwinism went together. Somewhere in the line, I found out about chaos and emergence and complexity, and that blew my mind. And that was like self-organizing systems, and I thought, oh, you could actually gen this thing up from essentially molecules and get to people. And then I got very curious about how that would happen at the level of where the heck did life come from, right? And so I just kept on getting interested in these things. And then it sort of fit together in this escalation of, okay, it starts with physics, we know that. It kind of ends with theory, we kind of know that. What are the steps in between? Right. So that's kind of what, I don't know. It was a journey.
A journey that sounds like seated in profound curiosity.
Yeah, it hasn't stopped, by the way. I'm still curious.
Yeah. And so just consistent with the what, how, the why, how, what, how did you learn something about everything on a 13.8 billion year journey and have a pretty, in-depth point of view on every single aspect of existence? How did you do it?
How did I do it? I like to read, and I like to read, and I like to think about what I'm reading. So I would get hooked on, I'll give you one example, the microbiology of the cell. So I was a venture partner at Moore David Dow. We were investing in healthcare and pharma. I'm thinking, well, I need to learn something about this stuff. I don't know anything about it. And so this one CEO said, I have the perfect book for you to read. And I said, great. And he said, I'm going to send it to you. I think this is perfect. I'm thinking it's going to be like about the size of the Infinite Staircase, right? This book lands on my doorstep. It's 2.5 inches thick, and it looks like the Encyclopedia Britannica. And I'm thinking, oh, God. And I'm sure it cost, $100 or whatever. The guy just sent it to me, right? So I think, well, I can't not, I got to at least open it, right?
Right.
So I open it, and I read the first page, and there's a good cartoon diagram on it, which made sense to me. So I turned the page, and I read the second page. And then you start reading, you go, no way. No, it can't work like that. It does? You're kidding me. And it just went on and on. And I would I'd be reading next to Maria. I'd say, Maria, you can't. And she would just say, shh, shh, shh. She was so tired of me. But the point was, you just went, holy. And so
you
said wonder and awe. Yeah, it was like, no. And so the more that happened, I thought, okay. So at one point I thought, all I really need to do is write sort of a cliff notes to this book, and I'll be done. That'll be it. But then I read The Astrophysicists, and then you read about the cosmology and what is. So anyway, it ended up saying, no, you got to do the whole thing, soup to nuts.
Well, this soup to nuts. The following question, on the what, might be a little test of your memory, because what I would love to do is actually have you walk me through a little bit each of the sections. If we could start with the metaphysics and start with the physics, the chemistry, the biology.
Okay.
We'll walk through each
okay.
of the staircases.
Right. I think it's fair.
If you'll indulge.
Well,
yes.
If anybody's watching this, it's like, come on, what was this about? So basically, when we're lining up the situation, the idea was, okay, it's a staircase. The reason it's a staircase is because the way emergence works is you create a level of reality, and that level self-organizes and behaves in a way that creates a second level of reality that clearly is traceable to the one below it, but it's not predictable from it. It has new properties, it has new stuff. The most obvious example is if you start with physics, the first 400,000 years, there were no atoms because it was too hot. The electrons could not cool down enough to hang out with the protons and make a nucleus. There were no atoms. So then 400,000 years into the Big Bang, all of a sudden it cools down enough that the electrons and we get hydrogen and we get helium and we start getting these different atoms. Well, that's chemistry emerging out of physics. And then when we got the periodic table, there's this incredible, this thing that's on the wall of every chemistry class in the world, but it's just the most amazing thing where you organize the table in rows, but its brilliance is that the columns come out of the rows. And you go, what? So that was the first one. So the first part is just about what's the physical science story of how we get from here to there. And the theory of that section is that the universe has been trying to cool down for 3.8 billion years, and it's still trying to cool down. That creates a flow from high order to low order, what we call entropy. But that flow continually get caught up in things that are actually going the opposite direction. I use the metaphor of a mill, where you have a river flowing past the mill, but the mill could actually use the river to build more complex things, even though the river is flowing to increasing disorder. And that's where ordered life comes from. It comes from actually the repurposing of the flow of entropy toward higher degrees of order. And we talk about it in physics, and we talk about it in chemistry, and we talk about it in biology. And the idea is just to say, look, if you will just want to account for the physical presence of you, me, this couch, whatever, you can do that physically just through the entropy play. What you can't account for is the experience of consciousness. We can't account for this conversation. So at some point you got to get from biology into consciousness. And so the second half was called, the second section of the staircase was called the metaphysics of Darwinism, because it got from single cell bacteria, which by the way, for 2 billion years, Earth's been around for like 4.5 billion. Life started somewhere around 4 billion a year. For the first 2 billion, it was just bacteria. It was just gunk. I mean, basically, the Earth was just like gunk. There was nothing, just gunk. And then we started getting, more complex things. So that was Darwinism. So that was gunk. That was gunk trying to reproduce itself in competition with other gunk. And it sort of discovered, if we can work together, we can actually outcompete those gunk that aren't working together. And so you get this increasingly more complex organisms kind of going up. So it started, we talk about how desire, which is really just a form of signaling. How does gunk talk to each other? It talks through hormones and stuff like that. And eventually you say, okay, now in that competition, consciousness initially is just signal processing. It's just, okay, I can process the signal faster than you can. I can beat you. But eventually that leads to a brain. It leads to consciousness. And so, and with consciousness, we shifted the focus specifically then to mammals. Mm-hmm. Because mammals, unlike reptiles, both are conscious, but mammals is what leads to us, and reptiles doesn't. And it's because mammals nurture their young. And so the thing that came after in that metaphysics of Darwinism was values and culture, which allow you to take steps beyond just your personal immediate circumstances, and use the group, and the group can become part of the strategy for living. That happens with mammals, but it doesn't happen with reptiles. So that was important. But I wanted to build that entire part of the staircase without language. So I was thinking about deer, I was thinking about dogs, I was thinking about babies, but I was like, how far can you get without words? Because my claim is once words come into the game, we start separating from each other. Prior to words, we actually can be unified. And so it was a big deal for me to say, look, there is a common set of human values. Anthropologists say, no, there isn't. Every society is different. It's like every society has a different language. So yes, by the time language is there, yes, we can't. But prior to that, we're all mammals. We were all nurtured at birth. If we weren't, you and I would not be here, because babies cannot feed themselves, right? So we all inherited love at birth. We had to. So anyway, I wanted to make sure we grounded that, because I wanted the values to come from below, as it were. Anyway, that got to then the big game changer for the third chapter is language, because with language now you're playing at a completely different level.
From genes to memes.
From genes to memes, yeah, exactly. So Darwinism was all about how you select for genes, because genes have strategies for living. I mean, a spider has a strategy for living; it's in their genes. Well, we have genes too, but we also have memes. So memes are ideas that are strategies for living. And Darwinism selects for strategies for living with memes pretty much the same way it does with genes. In other words, does it work and does it spread? And so we have viral memes and whatever. So that got us to language, and with language, that led to narrative and then analytics. But narrative is, and I'm an English major, so bear with me, narrative was, to me, my favorite stair, because that's the stair I came in on, right? And I think that telling stories is a whole part of how our theory of anything is that we tell a story about it, and then we apply analytics to it. This is like venture capital, like you and I are listening to investment pitches. It's a story, right? And then we apply analytics to it, right? And so that most of human activity, in my experience, at least adult human activity, is stories and analytics, stories and analytics. I mean, I see Marie every day. How was your day today? I will tell you a story, okay? Well, what did you do? What did you hear from Michael? Tell you another story, okay? So it's all stories and analytics, and then the idea of theory was, well, can you really make it all stack in together? And so the last thing was the theory, and it was saying, okay, if you use the staircase, here's how you can make it all fit together. And so that was like a 2/3 of the end of the book, and I thought, well, I'm done, it's great. And I thought, Jeffrey, so what? I mean, I'm glad that you think you're really smart, but I'm like, so what? And so that led to the last third, which is the ethics, which is, okay, now how am I supposed to live? What am I supposed to do?
I won't tell the other stairs that narrative is your favorite.
Okay. Because they are jealous. They're all very jealous of each other. Yes, that's true.
That was incredible.
Well, I have to say something. Right. So yeah. I love reading these books about physics, but you can tell a physicist in a heartbeat, because you know what they believe? They believe their stair is the only real stair.
You commented on that for lots of different, for each stair, and then also within a given stair, in the narrative stair and in the ethics stair and the different philosophers, you commented on how they're each convinced.
You get stuck on a stair, and the one I've just been, because I'm reading a really cool book about physics right now, a book named Fundamentals. I don't know who the author is, but they're so good, but they inevitably say, well, but the only reality is like quarks and leptons, and it's like, really? Like, what did you have for lunch today?
And how did you feel about your lunch?
How did you feel about your lunch? So but without quarks and leptons, we would not be here. So I mean, It's not like there's a real stair there, but it's not the only stair.
So Jeff, before we tackle part 2, ethics and how best to live, I have a couple questions that just generically speckled around these aspects of human nature that you refer to that I just can't stop from asking. Ranging from leadership to entrepreneurship to how democracy... What
you and I care about in our daily lives.
Climate change. How does this apply?
Yeah, exactly. Come on, bring it down. Bring it down, buddy.
And we will end with, of course, how do I live? But we're gonna begin with how should we live?
Good.
So let's just start with, since we work at a venture capital firm together, let's start with some of the conversations around leadership, entrepreneurship. You made some really interesting comments around a hormonal response that is expressed when a leader is willing to make a sacrifice on behalf of the group.
Yeah.
And it was just got me really intrigued in servant leadership and sort of some aspects of leadership. There's lots of philosophies. There's lots of people opining on how to be great leaders. There's lots of different ways to crack the nut. I'd love any thoughts you may have come to as you explored leadership in this context.
Well, the thing, I would say that my recent thinking about leadership has been hugely influenced by my work with Salesforce and being around Mark Benioff and his team. And because what I've seen in that situation, more than with any other client particularly, is the entire ecosystem leans in to help them. And that's both internal to internal, external. You start saying, well, and then you start thinking, look how powerful that is. When all of a sudden, if the world kind of is working with you, it's aligning with you, and by the way, you're aligning with the world, and that's how it works. You have to both get in alignment. Just things happen much faster. They happen more. And then when the pandemic came and they did all these interesting things around, getting PPE available to people very quickly, and they put together this pandemic tracking system very, very quickly. They were able to do amazing things. And you say, well, where did that come from? Well, it comes from an altruistic seed. And so then the question is, well, where does altruism come from? And there's a guy, Daniel Dennett, has written a bunch of books on Darwinism and on the selfish gene. And you can get into a frame of mind where you think, well, altruism's a mistake, or it's some later epiphenomenon, it's not real. And you think, yeah, it is real, because that's how mammals win. Mammals win through teamwork. They win through playing together. So, and you say, well, where does the teamwork come from? It comes from the leader. So in a mammalian competition, there's an alpha leader, typically male, but not always, who rallies the troops and who is at the front in the engagement. So the first thing is you have to lead from the front, not from behind. But the second thing is everybody in that pack will sacrifice for the rest of the pack. And they're just wired to do it. I mean, they're not like thinking about it; they just do it. And so you say, okay, now if I bring that through the filter of language, now I have the ability to sort of sit back from that and say, well, should I or shouldn't I? And a bunch of people are free riders, and they actually don't do it. But the leaders create that; they recreate that, I guess, hormonal experience. I mean, of saying, look, I want to be part of this. I'm willing to live for this. I'm willing to die for this. I am willing to act for this. Most altruism is not life or death. Most altruism is, just, hey, would you put in the extra mileage to get there? And it's we call it inspiration. You inspire, and then I think you inspire, and then you have to direct, because a lot of people can get inspired, but then the energy just gets evaporated. I sometimes call it corporate entertainment. You have this wonderful vision, and then it's just like, but nothing ever happens. That, at the end of the day, that feels really bad. It leaves a bad taste in your mouth. But if you can take that inspiration and turn it into an achievement, into some impact, and I think impact at some point becomes an important word for everybody, because we all want to leave an impact, as we're kind of going through life, and when we leave, we want to have made an impact. So I think all of that, the leaders, I think they inspire, I think they then direct, and they acknowledge, when we're having, but they don't have Barney Awards. We don't have a little participation award. You get a little trophy for playing. It's like, no, we're going to acknowledge where we had impact, and then we're going to trace that impact back to individuals, because we want to. Not only do we want to acknowledge them, we want the entire community to see this is how we have. This is how we do it.
This is what mattered. Is the actual impact.
Yeah. Which is never obvious. I mean, a lot of times the person you think who gets the credit, that's not actually where it happened. And it's not that. Yeah, it's kind of painful that person got credit when they didn't deserve it. But that's not the real issue. The real issue is we want to repeat impact, so we got to know where it actually happened.
Right. So we have to trace it, pattern build.
Yeah.
Find the idiosyncrasies of it. Okay. And then as we parlay that into, and I'm jumping way ahead in the book, but I have a subtext agenda here, which is as we talk about culture, in culture design in your book, if I had a vision for what culture I wanted to design, and I parlay your leadership advice into that, I want a culture moving forward that acknowledges the shift in climate and plans for it. Okay. And do you have best advice? A lot of what you described in culture design is factoring in those leadership functions, and then putting a layer of best practice over and a lot of time and evolution and sort of Darwinian evolution of the culture. How do you do that quickly? Can you do it quickly? Can we truly shift?
Yeah, it's interesting. So, because we talked about this earlier, and so I've been sort of trying to process it. Yeah. So, climate change is this topic that's like coming at us, and as human beings, we tend to live in a set of concentric circles. So, the first circle is can I take care of myself? The second circle, which is even maybe more important, can I take care of my family? Can I take care of my loved ones? Can I take care of my house? Can I take care of my neighborhood? Can I, and we have these circles coming out. Climate's like at the other end of that thing. And for most people, most of the time, it is so abstract and so removed that they can't build a bridge between their actions and climate. And so as a result, we perpetuated for a very long time a set of behaviors that creates the conditions that we're increasingly inheriting. We've now, the human being, because we have theories and because we have analytics, we've said, look, when you apply our analytics to this situation, it's getting worse, not better. We are the cause, and here are the things that are causing it. So that's all goodness. And this is leaders saying, okay, where's the cause? But the next step is to say, okay, so and what are the fixes? And then there's, okay, now, and then we have this thing about the human race, which is until like we're right up against things,
right.
It's like we're so bad.
And is that in our nature?
I think at some point, yeah, I think Darwinism selects for immediate response more. Yeah. But having said that, so now what would it take?
Right.
Because there's a whole generation of young people that are going, well, I'll volunteer for this army.
And it feels a little more immediate to them.
Yeah, right? Yeah, I think exactly. And they're also, when you're young, it's like, well, old people screw everything up. I mean, we have to fix something. Why don't we fix this?
They're not entirely wrong.
Well, with me, it was the Vietnam War. When I was growing up, there was you guys screwed that up. We got to fix that, right? So this is climate change. So I think what we have to do is, first of all, I think we have to frame it in ways that are clearly understandable, and then figure out, design backward, what policies would fix that, and not get righteous and not get ahead of ourselves, because when we get too far ahead of ourselves, you get the backlashes, and then you get the backlashes right now have been, the whole climate change backlashes. It's part of a whole dark divisiveness going on, at least in the U.S. And our dialogue has just become horrible. But climate change has been one of those places. So I think what we can do is say, look, if we build frameworks, if we build accountable metrics into them, if we create the right incentives, I mean, there's still a lot to do. And if you're an individual, even if you're a head of a corporation, unless you're saying, look, we need to lead. One of the things I am encouraged by businesses, I think governments want to lead, but governments are not good at leading. You'd think they would be great at leading, but they're not. And so I think business actually is going to take more, because business can take more risk. They're willing to take more risk in a shorter period of time. And then I think ultimately governments are necessary to scale. You can't scale without government. But I think initially we're gonna have to take action. And so I'm very encouraged by companies, and the financial sector is getting behind this. The technology sector is definitely getting behind this. Even the oil, you're kind of thinking there's a conflict of interest here, but they're trying to get behind it. The automobile industry trying to go to electric vehicles, solar power. I mean, there's a bunch of stuff that if we can show the economics, that there's an economic return from it as well as an environmental return, I think we can make a lot of progress.
Right. Which we partly achieved because of the intervention of government.
Yes.
And so that leads us to entrepreneurship, and you referenced sort of for that kind of activity to occur, entrepreneurship, risk-taking. You talked about sort of hunger, the hunger that's required, or a sense of scarcity, necessity being the mother of invention. So if we're depending on our entrepreneurs and our business ecosystem to deliver at least some of the solutions, what are the environments that are most conducive to an entrepreneur? What about human nature optimizes? What do we need to support entrepreneurs?
I think this is, Patrick Lencioni has that wonderful book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team.
Love it.
It starts with trust. Yeah. It does start with trust. And the thing that's so scary about our environment right now is how much cynicism has become baked into the norms. So the cynicism around any statement of value by a public figure right now is chilling, because if you cannot build a foundation of trust, you can't get to the next place. You can't get there. So I think this notion of saying, look, and trust radiates outward. So it's not like we're going to get rid of cynicism, but what you can do is push the boundaries of cynicism outward by essentially creating relationships of trust and achievements of trust as a kind of a positive force. And and so what venture capitalists try to do with venture firms, but what anybody does, you do it in a church, you can do it in a baseball team, you can do it in your family. You say, look, we need to establish this place of trust. And when you're in a dysfunctional relationship, we've seen the opposite. We've seen how dysfunctional relationships erode trust, and then it's like, there's just no place to hide, right?
So many places I'd like to go with that, but if we're going to talk about the breakdown of trust, then I have to go to democracy. Okay. There are conversations going on about perhaps better models than democracy. I think of democracy with our well-guided, somewhat regulated capitalism as the best system I can imagine, that my brain can comprehend.
Yep.
In this exercise, did you envision a better one? Do you have any better ideas that are more cohesive with our actual nature?
No.
So we're stuck with it?
No. The closest we got to it was talking about justice and morality and justice, but justice in particular. And the chapter, or the section on justice said, look, there's two kinds of justice, at least for my purposes: legal justice and social justice. So legal justice is the rule of law. And there's a really good set of parameters for defining the rule of law globally, and they're kind of expressed in international organizations. So, and we have a lot of rule of law still in the United States, and we take it for granted.
That's true.
And the truth is, most of the world does not even enjoy rule of law. But even if you have perfect legal justice, you can still have people who are homeless, people who are dying of COVID, people who are whatever. It's not illegal, but it's kind of immoral. It feels like it's immoral. It feels like it's wrong. So I wanted to call that second body of responsibilities or actionability as social justice. And what you realize about legal justice and social justice around the world is there have been many, many revolutions where the revolutionaries, whether it's the communist revolutionaries, whether it doesn't matter who, the Taliban, it doesn't matter who it is, they're overthrowing the government because they're saying social justice takes priority over legal justice. And we are going to essentially revolutionize this society. By the way, we're going to kill a bunch of people, we're going to install a bunch of different leaders, but that social justice requires this. The problem with that is if you destroy the fabric of legal justice, there's no way to sustain social justice. So that what happens to all those movements is they become corrupt. They're just, in fact, horrifically corrupt. And we don't get to the place. So what it made me realize is legal justice is this incredibly important heritage. And by the way, we got it. This is largely a European heritage, and frankly, it's largely a British heritage in the United States. But we were gifted with a society that is biased toward legal justice. Now we're eroding it.
And it leaves some people behind, but infrastructurally.
But that's social justice. When somebody gets left behind, now you say, look, I want to deal with social justice, but it's not okay to override. In fact, you must not override legal justice. You mustn't. And so that means so if you look like, say it was a totalitarian system, if you had a totalitarian system that respected legal justice, it would probably work better than democracy. In fact, you could argue that Singapore, the guy that ran Singapore, kind of did that in a local point. The problem is totalitarian systems inevitably override legal justice, and so then it doesn't work. So with democracy, we're kind of muddling through, to say the least. I have to say the biggest change in my life, when I was 20 years old, I thought I really did believe in not socialism, but I believed in the social action of government. I'm now much more excited by what business can do, and then government can scale. But I thought government was going to lead and business was going to reluctantly follow. That was the model for most of my adult life.
Right.
And now it's like, I think it's actually the opposite.
Fascinating. Okay, which brings me to one thing I was dying to ask you as a student of language. There's an argument that innovation, back to our conversation around sort of entrepreneurs and the business world being at least some part of the solve, is just the output or the work product of creativity, the creating of something, which is just the output or work product of imagination.
Yep.
And you talked about imagination as manifesting in language.
Yep.
And I'd love to sort of bridge those a little bit.
Sure. This is now we're at the very heart of, I mean, I would say we're now at the very heart of my intellectual center point, which would be this notion that literature can express strategies for living because what you do is you present a pattern in one set of circumstances, and the reader actually realizes you can apply that pattern someplace else. So what a metaphor says is look, if I say to you, one of the examples I use is our DNA codes for proteins. Well, that's a metaphor. DNA is not a programmer. DNA has no brain. It can't code, and it doesn't program. But when you say DNA codes for proteins, you go, oh, I see I get it. I get it. There's a code, and it turns out there's these four letters that make up the DNA code, and it does code for a protein. But what we're doing is we're taking a pattern that we know very, very well from one part of life, and we're saying there's a mysterious activity over here that you can understand and predict and control by using this pattern from over here. So that act of metaphor of saying I'm going to apply an idea from a well-known body of experience to a mysterious body of experience, and I'm going to gain control over the mystery by applying the same rules, and I'm going to map. It's like an analogy. I'm going to map it one-to-one, and then you apply analytics to say, is it working or is it not working? Because metaphors are never perfect, right? So, well, it works under these circumstances, it doesn't work under those circumstances. But the beginning moment is the aha, which is, I've seen this before. Where did I see it before? I don't know. But it's that connection. And so imagination is the ability to say, I am going to embody a situation, and what literary imagination is about is saying I'm going to embody it in a story, but like engineering imagination is I've seen this relationship somewhere else. I'm going to apply it over here. You know, I'm the guy Niels Bohr. I've seen the sun, the planets going around the sun. I think electrons going around the nucleus. I think there's something there. It turned out it wasn't quite right, but that metaphor started saying there's shells of electrons, and that we get to we can explain the periodic table by using the shells. Well, all of that at some point, or the benzene ring, where the guy had the dream of the snake that was biting his own tail. He thought, it's a ring. It's a ring. The benzene is a ring, and sometimes it comes in dreams, right? And you go, whoa. Crossing the Chasm, my first book, right? I mean, I was just sitting and looking at the bell curve, and I thought, the first part of the bell curve is really very different from the middle of the bell curve. I'll bet they want to separate from each other.
You were literally staring at a bell curve?
Yeah. And I thought,
as one does.
Well, because, yes.
What else would one do?
What's more fun to do this to? I was at Regis McKenna. There was the technology induction life cycle. We were drawing diagrams on a whiteboard. And I thought, what would happen if you broke that thing off? And that seemed to symbolize what was going on. And I thought, well, so
it was visual.
Yeah, and there was a chasm between them. Well, how would you cross the chasm? I mean, so that was a metaphor, right? And all it was, and then I thought, well, it's like D-Day, right? It's like you're in England, and this is like France. And so the whole D-Day metaphor structured crossing the chasm. I mean, the Allies did not decide, we'll send troops to Stockholm, Paris, Fresno. They said, no, we're going to go to Normandy. We're going to put everybody at Normandy. We're going to take the beaches at Normandy, and we'll go from there. And if you look at crossing the chasm, it's a Normandy strategy.
And it really is story with analysis.
And it starts with story.
It starts with story.
It always starts with story, and it always goes to, it doesn't always. If you start with analytics, and this is a danger, by the way, in our profession, so there are a lot of investors that want to start with spreadsheets. Spreadsheets are good if you're extrapolating in a relatively constant market, but in a disrupted market, that's the rearview mirror. And so how do you envision the future? Stories. And all the best presentations that we see, somebody starts by essentially telling you a story about the future. And then the question is, do you believe my story or not? And then if I do believe your story, Do I believe in you as an actor in that story? And then do I believe the world will support you in acting out that story? I mean, those are some of the questions. And that takes those are real analytics.
Then you move into the world of analytics.
Yeah, but to be fair, in the analytics chapter, I divided it into STEM and humanities. I do humanities analytics. I'm not so good at STEM analytics. I have some very good friends that are very good at STEM analytics.
Takes all types.
Yeah,
Takes all types, Jeffrey.
And then you get to artificial intelligence and machine learning.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that. You've had some interesting thoughts on that, and you did say, as one of your directives for the culture we are building, more math.
Yes.
Let's embrace this AI ML wave.
It's amazing because what so much, and by the way, I do connect it back to biology in the sense that I think babies learn how to process reality and eventually process language through something that looks very much, I'm using the metaphor of machine learning to actually understand that. So that they kind of learn at one layer at a time, this sort of deep neural networking metaphor. But what's so important about particularly machine learning is it's basically a signal detection capability, and there are many algorithms. But the takeaway from that though is, in all of the noise of this digital universe and all these digital signals that we get, and all this digital barrage we get, there are signals. Just the way there are, if we can detect them, we can predict things better, we can control things better. They're going to be critical to climate change. We're going to need to detect climate signals in a very subtle way that as a human being we wouldn't catch. So we need this stuff to work at scale. And now that we're putting digital everywhere, we've got log files for everything. It's like, okay, that's the food which you feed an algorithm with.
That is the food. And it takes, this is a little bit of a divergence, but it takes a multiple types of mind, diversity of typology and also diversity of thought in order to design the algorithms creatively enough to capture what we can't even imagine.
That's the real diversity. You know, we have this whole thing about diversity right now. To be fair, we're trying to deal with issues of gender and race and
trying to crack a lot of codes right now. Yeah.
And all that, and I'm 100% behind that.
I know
but
you
there's
are.
Another kind of diversity that you just referred to, which is, to me, problem-solving diversity. And it is, you do bring these very different mental skills together, and there is a kind of a implied sequence. And initially, it starts with narrative. I think it starts with insight. And I think insight is based, my bet is it's based on metaphor, that there's a root metaphor that you're saying that I'm going to solve this unsolved problem because I'm going to apply an analogy from something I understand to solve it. And then I start telling a story about how this would work out based on that analogy. And then we start critiquing that story initially with natural language. Is that really credible? Does that sound real? What are you talking about? What makes you believe that? Blah, blah, blah. But then sooner or later you say, well, and then this is where the Google guys blew my mind. Because what they said is, we're not going to make those decisions the way you make them, Jeffrey. We're just going to run A/B experiments until the world just tells us. And I went, oh, because I was totally unprepared for Google. I mean, the whole idea of getting that much data and providing that sort of massive signal detection power against it, I just couldn't even imagine how that would work. And then you saw it working and working more and more and more, and you went, whoa. So that's the math analytics. So it's just like,
it's really interesting. There's this idea of we've been emerging as sort of neurotypes.
Yep.
And then the next level is ML to AI, and just your reference to Google intrigues me. There's this layer right now where people are starting to have a conversation that they're at the helm of around neurodiversity.
Yes.
And this idea of there's neurotypical people.
Yep.
And actually they're going out of their way to test for people who don't think the way
Yes.
others do. In fact, so much so that that way of thinking might have been considered on the disorder spectrum historically.
Yep.
And their point increasingly is that's not a disorder.
Yep.
It's just neurodiverse.
Yes.
And if we don't insert that quickly before we build out a universe of AI ML, and I have to be careful with my term universe here because it means something specific that I was meaning thematically, that if we insert that thoughtfully, the diversity of thought, the sort of neurodiversity early on, that's a really important stage. And it got me curious because evolution the Darwinian kind that we used to talk about doesn't exist anymore. We aren't going to, or does it?
No, it does. No, it absolutely does. No, it does. But it's acting on memes, not genes. Remember? So basically, what's happening is that neurodiversity either will create a better strategy for living or not.
Okay.
And then the universe will select for successful strategies for living. Okay. And then that's happening to us all the time.
Got it. Okay. So evolution isn't dead.
No, evolution, no. Yeah, what it did shift more from genes to memes, yes. Right? So for humans, because we are creatures of ideas more than we have biology, but we live in this world of ideas. But no, I mean, right now, in fact, back to this issue, which has got me so anxious, which is the quality of dialogue in our society. To be successful in a universe of memes and to ferret out the best strategies for living, you have to be honest, you have to be aware, you have to listen, you have to have diversity of views. When you have people doing their absolute best to do the absolute opposite of that, and to do it at scale, and to do it intentionally for the worst possible motives I can imagine, and to be winning at doing it, because these people, this bullying approach. And by the way, whether it's, I personally, okay, I'm more on the left, so I'm obviously thinking more about Trump. But I can imagine somebody on the right thinking more about, it really isn't about politics as much as it's about this cynical manipulation of misinformation in order to suppress dialogue and activate anger and fear and outrage, and all that stuff. It's dangerous. I mean, we're now messing with the thing that is our best tool.
It's almost as if we are messing with evolution.
Yeah.
The stories, the narratives are being corrupted.
In the world of memes, if you mess with now you're messing with it. It's almost like I'm mutating your gene. It's almost like doing biological gene engineering.
My bad media really is I am GMOing.
Well, but it is. But it is. Bad media is genetically modifying.
The organism.
It's mimetically.
Mimetically modifying.
Memes, not
I
genes.
love this.
Yeah, and it's spooky. Well, it's not spooky. It's worse than spooky. And so
it's worse than spooky because it might just, if democracy or a modified version of regulated capitalist democracy is our best bet. I work a lot in sort of nonpartisan democracy reform.
Yep.
And it's on the brink. It may not survive the meme erosion or the...
So the key to Darwinism is two things: natural selection and sexual selection. So natural selection is what strategies work best, and sexual selection is which strategies are most popular. So the scary thing about what's going on in our society, these memes which are destructive are incredibly popular. They're viral. They're very appealing. And so as a result, they spread like crazy. They're like a virus. I mean, literally, like the COVID virus, the Delta version, and probably there'll be worse ones to come. They spread incredibly fast. So it's really important that we, quote, vaccinate against these viruses. So what is the vaccination? It's frankly, I mean, I'm again going back to my roots. I think it's liberal arts education. I think it's understanding natural language analytics, being able to understand, when is a person telling the truth and not, and how would you know, and how would you verify, and why is it important to do that? And so that's all the stuff that, that's philosophy and economics and history and literature and language. I mean, it's all of that stuff. And of course, if you're playing the other game, you try to poo-poo all of that. It's all fake news. It's everything is cynical. You can't trust anybody. And then who yells the loudest wins. And it's in a local situation that can carry the day, as it did January 6th in Washington, D.C.
Then, to use your paradigm, is a liberal arts education the narrative or the story that frames our culture?
Probably. Well, it's certainly my view. Or
should frame our
could. Well, at least I am so imbued with that thing. I think I'm like the fish in water. I can't even see the water because that's just what I swim in. So I think we should be careful with how far we take that liberal arts education idea. But I mean, my first
at least
career,
critical thinking.
Yes, fair enough. And critical thinking and also respect for narrative.
Right. And its power, not just it itself.
Yeah, honor the narrative. And narratives like atomic power, it can be incredibly used for good and incredibly used for, bad stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Jeffrey, before we dive into ethics, we get to stop in being.
Okay.
We get to be. And just starting very pragmatically, you revealed that you had a 50-year relationship with Transcendental Meditation. I'm dying to just kind of with the same urge that I have when I'm standing at the grocery store and I'm looking at the cover of Maple magazine, like, how'd they do? What was that like?
What was that like?
What was that like? What did you tell me a little bit about how you entered it and what that journey's been like?
Yeah, it's definitely a game changer. So Marie and I were just married. We going to grad school in Seattle. We had a friend who was interested, so we thought we'd try it out. For me, it was a point. I had taken a real interest in existentialism in college, and that was part of like the secular narrative. That's when I kind of abandoned the religious narrative and said, okay, I got to embrace the secular narrative. And what I liked about the existentialists was they were very courageous and they were very authentic about what they were trying to do. Basically, their story was make it up. Just, it's your life, make it up. But that doesn't give you a lot of spiritual experience. And I found myself like, it was the 60s, and it was, spiritual experience was on everybody's mind. We thought, maybe, could drugs give it to you? And drugs were kind of cool, but they didn't actually give you a spiritual experience. So it's like, well, what's it about? So anyway, we thought we'd try meditation. So meditating, and I thought meditating was going to be like, hard to do, like Zen, and it was going to be concentrate and all this stuff. Turned out it was like, no, it's not. It's like mindfulness. It's just, just put your awareness on the mantra and that's it. And basically, a few seconds later, you'll be thinking about something. That's called release of stress. So the thought is a release of stress. At some point, you'll realize, wow, I'm not on the mantra. Go back to the mantra. That's it.
No judgment.
And basically, what happens if you do it over and over and over again, first of all, at the beginning, when you hit pockets of stress, it's like being in an airplane. I mean, I found myself giving speeches, and I was, tirading and whatever. Calm down. But after a while, that stuff kind of goes away, and you don't keep the stress. So what you start realizing after a while is two things. You're getting some really good relaxation, analogous to sleep, but different. But you're also not carrying stress around as much. And so when you're raising little kids and you're in grad school and you're doing all this stuff, it's really...
It's a nice tool.
It's a nice tool. And then when I started in business and I started getting on airplanes and traveling all over the place, you can meditate on an airplane. It's really easy. So that was a huge thing. What happens over a while is, after a while, this sense, and then you start saying, there is after we got rid of the stress, just being feels pretty good. Being it's not bliss. They use the word bliss. I thought that was confusing. It's quiet, but it's so reassuring. It's being centered. It's just like, I'm okay. You're there, and it's good. And so initially that happens, and then it goes away and it comes back. If you keep doing it, it doesn't go away. It's like it's always. By the way, you are being all the time, so it's there all the time.
When did that happen? In year?
Oh gosh, I don't know. But somewhere along the line it did.
Okay.
And then the other thing that happens is, because you've gotten quiet, you've kind of released a bunch of the stress, you can pick up on ideas earlier. I don't know. So you can you can see things more subtly, and so as a result, like this is a exercise in a lot of trying to do subtle thinking. Well, it really does help if you had a bunch of meditating. So it was a big deal. But mostly what it did, and what it meant in the book was, and this, the final thing was, transcendental meditation was such a specialized thing. It was the Maharishi. You had to get initiated. Mm-hmm. There was a fee, and it was for a lot of people, it was like just a non-starter. But then mindfulness came into the culture somewhere along the line, and mindfulness and transcendental meditation are virtually identical. Transcendental meditation is a very elegant form of mindfulness, but in mindfulness, you use your breathing as a mantra, and it's exactly the same strategy.
Just infinitely accessible.
Yeah, and infinitely accessible, exactly. So what was important about that was, because we were going into ethics, and it was like, hey, I built this whole metaphysical picture, but like, where do you get help for being moral? Where's the spiritual support in this infinite staircase? And I couldn't find it. I mean, it was a great explanation from Big Bang to theory, but it was like, but where's the help here? And so I needed to put, so being was the transitionary chapter, but I needed to put being on the staircase. I couldn't say, well, there's this staircase, but then there's being. It's like, well, that's called religion, Jeffrey. I mean, come on. If you're going to have the staircase, you got to put it somewhere. So I had a couple places I could perk it. One, what a transcendentalist would say is being is beneath physics. It's like, it's there. I thought, well, good story, but no way to verify, and I'm not even sure it's true, but okay.
And I have to interrupt you really quickly to say this is one of the 2 times in the book I cried when you said, I am taking 100% responsibility for the provability of the spiritual staircase.
Yeah.
And so you go on to prove it. I'm looking forward to this. I just wanted you to know that this is a very meaningful.
I did prove it. Okay.
I appreciate the effortfulness.
Well, it was because I thought, look, I mean, let's play by the rules. So the rules say it is about awareness. So you have to be conscious, okay? And the stair between biology and consciousness in the staircase is called desire. And desire is the natural orientation toward fulfillment. And so I put being between desire and consciousness because what it's consciousness taking itself out of all the other upper realms and just letting itself experience whatever's there. And there's tons of evidence that when you do that, there is a feeling of centeredness, and it is spiritually refreshing, and you are better suited to doing moral action, having done that. But I didn't as to how that worked out cosmically. There's a cosmic story which I'm actually sort of biased to liking. So I love the Transcendentalists. I love Thoreau. I love Emerson. I love Whitman. So if I'm singing songs, those are the songs I would sing. But I couldn't put it. I wanted to be fair to the staircase, and so I think it goes between desire and consciousness. And so what I said in the book was, at that point, being with a small b can become being with a big B because you become aware of being, and then that is at consciousness level.
And that aspect you were able to prove.
Yes.
As opposed to
beneath physics, it's like, I think it's kind of a neat idea. Field theory, I mean, physics has got a lot of fields. You add one more field, come on. If you have a Higgs boson, you ought to be able to have a transcendental field. But I said, no, I'm not going to do that.
Right. You also cautioned us to remain humble as we're only a few hundred years into this sort of secular model for a way of being. Can you talk a little bit about how we should do that?
Yeah, look, so what I was we were talking about the values, and my point was, look, some things we've had for a long time, kindness, which comes from mammalian nurturing, and the love that you experience from your mother, whoever's your caregiver, and you carry that forward with you in life, and you express it in ethical action through the acts of kindness. I said, we've had kindness for, I don't know, 300,000 years. I don't know how long. Actually, mammals, 600,000 years, but humanoids, things, maybe a couple 100,000 years. So we've had kindness for a long time. You can rely on kindness. Kindness is like, take that one to the bank, right? The next one was fairness. And fairness is interesting. So fairness actually requires you to abstract yourself and actually treat yourself as a member of a set. So that takes the cultural training to do that. It takes language, but little kids can learn to be fair. Kids, like when they're 4 years old, have really strong senses of fairness. So fairness has been around, I think, for tens of thousands of years. And so I'm thinking, okay, kindness, fairness, you're good. Morality was the next one. Morality is a narrative about the meaning of life and your role in it and what is right and what is wrong. That's an active language supported by narrative, and it has analytics. I mean, you have religious scholars explaining the Bible to you, and then they abstract out, this is what's right and this is what's wrong, and you have preachers and you have rabbis and you have priests and whatever, and they're all kind of giving you the scoop on this. That religion's, I don't know, 5,000 years old, order of magnitude. It's had its good moments, but it's had a lot of bad moments. And a lot of the worst acts we've committed in the name of religion. So we have to be careful with it. And particularly, it turns out it's the boundaries. As long as you have a community of faith, within that community of faith, this can be a rock, and it can be you've seen communities of faith that are just amazing, and they do amazingly wonderful things. but you're not allowed to impose it outside of your community of faith. But that's what happens. And so then we have jihads, and we have crusades, and we have manifest destinies, and we do horrible things. Because we're saying, no, my script is the right script. So we're the conquistadors, and we come into Mexico or we come into Peru, and it's like we destroy civilizations. So they're horrible, horrible things that come out of that morality thing. But as long as you're within your community of faith, it actually can be hugely, hugely powerful. And then the last one was justice. And justice is based on a theory of the state where you have rights and you have sanctions, and you have rules and whatever. Is that like 500? I mean, there's kind of a Roman version of it 2,000 years ago, but the really modern state's probably 500 years old, maybe 400, 500 years old. Guys, that's not many shots on goal. So the fact that we're having this problem with legal justice and social justice, no big surprise. And I sort of get a little bit amused by. Not amused isn't quite. That's too pretentious. When people have these really righteous things about social justice, and you can feel where they're coming from, because they're feeling incredible empathy for somebody it's just not fair. But the problem is when you try to solve it at the level of the state, it just doesn't solve at that level. And so you have these sort of these sweeping acts of like, if only we did, completely re-engineered the entire universe, this would work. And you go, it's not going to work that way. So this is back to our discussion of democracy. You can't do these at high speed, I don't think. So anyway.
Right. And the humility is key as we take great care as we
please.
We're only 500 years in. I love the shots on goal. And then can you help me bridge? And we may have just done this, but bridging. The only place I lost the thread in the book, or at least that I knew I was losing the thread, which is a whole different level, was the bridging between being and ethics.
Yeah.
Can you help me with that?
Yeah, and by the way, to be fair, that maybe you may have found the place in the weak part in the bridge.
I'm at peace with that.
Well, no, I think it's possible. So
you're allowed to have one. By the way,
for sure,
there was one.
The thing about being is that I think being puts you in touch with energy that wants to support doing good, and doing good is not easy. It requires spiritual energy. And you have to be able to refresh it because you get tired and you have defeats and you need to have some place to go back and refill the well. And we use relationships to do that, but relationships are variable, and sometimes they're there for us and sometimes they're not. What was amazing about meditating and being is it's always there for you. It's just there, and it is powerful, and so it does give you a base for moral action. And I think without that base, you can still act ethically, but it's hard.
Okay. That threads it. I have had, as you mentioned in the book, we all have had those moments.
Yeah.
We've had them. We know, and it does feel provable if we've all had them, and they bridged us, whether it was just chemical or we were accessing something bigger. Your point was it's almost irrelevant because it did bridge into moral action.
Right. And the thing then is just to make it accessible. Because the hard part is, most of us can be moral on our best days. It's our worst days that are the hard ones, right? And you just need to have more support for your, I said the biggest barrier sometimes to kindness isn't evil. It's being tired and cranky.
Well, and it's asking a lot of humans, this idea, that I think you spoke of at the beginning of the ethics section, which is we've mostly been offered top-down models with God at the top.
Yes.
Or some other.
Yes.
And this is a bottoms-up model.
Yeah.
And it's asking us to really hold tethers to each of those stairs as we sit at the top unstably. It's a very intriguing idea, this ask of us to be responsible and take care, just because historically we have had the benefit of these top-down models.
Yes.
The sort of starting with God, and then we get to sit inside of that for better or worse. And now we're asking to sort of balance with some amount of nimbleness at the top of the infinite staircase that we've built. Can you talk a little bit about that? And then in the context you talked about, we're having to assemble our definition of human rights. What are we? Is it people when they're making the case inside of justice, for example, will make the case that it is a human right to be housed. Yes. Is it a human right to be housed, or is that so? We're standing on this bottoms up model. Yeah. We're constructing everything along the way. So I just wanted to hear you.
So I think the important thing about the bottom-up model is this Darwinistic metaphor, whether we're talking about literally Darwinistic evolution of genes, but more importantly for this discussion, the Darwinistic evolution of memes and ideas. Right. Okay, so what's happening is we're in a competitive world where we have strategies for living, and we are all acting out our strategies for living. So the world is giving us feedback on our strategies for living, and so that there is that shaping influence. And so, if we don't take responsibility for our strategies for living, who will? Now, there's a ton of culture that says, "Look, you shouldn't have to invent your strategy for living. People have been living a long time before you were, Jeffrey. Here's some really good ideas. Why don't you try this?" And for a long time, those were conveyed through religion, and they still are conveyed through religion. And the ethics that I describe are the ethics of most religions. I mean, it's not like this; they're unrelated religion, but religion derives it from saying there is a source of perfection, and then you kind of work down from there. And the problem with that is when you get to ambiguous behavior, people go, "Well, you're not believing in the right thing. That's why this isn't working. And I need to make you believe in the right thing in order to make this thing work." And that's where some of the bad behavior comes in. Mm-hmm. But the other thing that you were referring to was, remind me again.
This idea of, you in that context, you talk about human rights and our definition of it.
Yeah. So when you look at human rights, in the Darwinian model, rights is part of a part of social. If you look at back to the thing of justice, we had legal justice and social justice. So there is a set of rights in legal justice that's part of a social contract, and that's one level. But for example, there's no right not to be homeless in the legal contract. Mm-hmm. So that's the social justice, and in social justice, There aren't. I mean, I get what people are saying. There's a right to these things. That is in my view, an incorrect use of the word right, because what they're really saying is, I am not willing to support a world in which this is okay. But when you make it a right, you're trying to say that therefore society needs to organize to do all these things. We don't have enough, at least yet, enough bandwidth to do social justice at scale.
Is that where you would put the line? Is where is it pragmatically feasible for us?
And it's Darwinistic. In other words, to the degree that we can push the boundary of social justice outward and secure it, we win.
So if we can, we must.
Yeah, exactly.
But if we can't,
and by the way, we should push. We should be ambitious with it. But if you jump over that fence and try to go out into some other place, then you create something that either is not sustainable or is destructive, or it just doesn't work. So I think we have to honor the social contract of Darwinism, which says, look, this is a competition. I mean, life has a competitive element into it. And when we win, that's Darwinism giving us positive reinforcement. And when we lose, it's negative reinforcement. And so we should advocate for our species, and we should advocate for our community. So we should push outward against that selective pressure. But at some point, you want to honor the fact of, but I don't get to go all the way to.
So interesting. And now I get why and one more moment in which my sense of how important the staircase itself is, because if you're grounded in being, for example, as you are defining success and or winning and losing, your definition might shift.
Yes.
And so the feedback loop depends on your definition, and the definition depended on whether or not you were had a base in integrity.
So if you have a base, say, in anger or fear or rage, which many people do, you still act out a strategy for living. The issue of getting the world to align with you is harder, because the world does not like to align with rage and fear, although you can clump together people that will be thinking in common with you. But it's a tough road to hoe. So I think the more, to me, the more altruistic we can be, the more aligned we can be with kindness and fairness. And if you think about kindness and fairness, really justice is trying to just do fairness at scale.
Right.
And morality is just trying to do kindness at scale. And so just realize as you go to scale, at some point there are limits. That's where the humility has to come in. You got to honor the limits.
It's not my middle name. My son's middle name, by the way, is Justice. So I'm all about scale.
Well, but that's the ambition. Yes. But sail that win. I hope sail that succeeds.
Absolutely. Right. And I believe in. I like your framework for the pragmatic push as hard as you can, but it's got to stay inside the lines of pragmatism. So turning this a little bit on you for a moment is how has this changed? Has putting it into a framework like this changed the way you live? Has it changed any choices you make over a given day, or does it just allow you to a worldview on? I think I knew that at an intuitive level, and now I see why I made that choice.
Yeah, I don't think I use this book as a navigational aid for my life.
You don't?
No, I think my life goes kind of from inner peace outward rather than from theory downward.
Okay.
But what I was trying to do was say, look, we have this secular description of the world. If the problem with it right now is it's unclear how to position ethics. In other words, you talk to a lot of people who are religious, and they're saying, look, if there's no religious belief, there's no basis for ethics, and people can do anything they want, and it's bad behavior, and we need this. And by the way, I resonate with that argument. So I thought, well, but Jeffrey, you don't believe in a religion, so come on. So now, how is this going to work? So I wanted to put together two things. I wanted to put together the story, which is, do you have any idea how miraculous this secular story is? Because, we talk about miracles of religion. It isn't even close. The stories, but by the time you knit this thing together, it's like, the wildest fantasy in the world wouldn't even come close to reality.
Water into wine's got nothing on biology.
Exactly. So that was the first part. I just wanted to tell that story. But then the second part of it was, and it goes back to that existentialist moment in college, which is just saying, okay, you're responsible for crafting your thing. And I talk about trying to embrace a narrative, finding people that, first of all, it starts usually, well, in my case, I talked actually about watching Westerns as a kid. Mm-hmm. And when I was growing up, they were all on TV. And I just identified with every cowboy hero I ever saw. And it was all, because they were all good guys, and they all shot the bad guys and took care of the town, right? Some a little outside the law, but they were all good guys. So I had that sort of moral sort of identification with that narrative. And there's other stories that we tell, Harry Potter, and it's all the same stuff, right? So I had all that, and then the question was, okay, how do you take that one forward? And the next thing that happened to me was I met adult figures outside of my parents, whom I love very much, and my family, which I love very much, who I thought, oh, I want to be like them. So I had two teachers in the 8th grade, my cousin Stoddard Malarkey and a guy named Manville Schaffler, and they were very different. But they were just, I thought, I want to be like them. That's why I wanted to be a teacher. Okay, and then a little bit later, it was I was at Stanford. David Harris was our student body president my year, and that was fighting the Vietnam War and whatever. And I thought, and he was so courageous, and I thought, I want to be like him. And then then it was there were various people in the peace movement, whatever. And so I think there's a part of the ethics where you say, I want to model my life after these people that I aspire to be. And then at some point you think, but I have to be me, and I have to be it within so I have to translate those things into, and so that's when you start building a sense. But you need to build a narrative, and I think it's grounded in narrative, which says, myself is a character in a set of narratives. I participate in many narratives. The Wildcat narrative, my family narrative, many other narratives. But within that narrative, I have expectations of myself. I have ways I want to act. I have things I want to contribute. And I want to hold myself accountable to doing that. That to me is that existentialist authenticity. Yeah. Just hold yourself accountable to whatever your narrative is. And by the way, you have a lot of freedom in picking your narrative. But you want to pick a narrative that is life-supporting, that other people can buy into, as opposed to picking a narrative which is very self-centered. And the problem with self-centered narratives is other people don't support them.
I love the idea of being able to that you give them something to buy into, so that you could play that role as people are. And then you actually defined it at one point as a story that you could live for or even die on behalf of. I would imagine that. And you said, but many narratives, you don't have to do all that. You just have to, it just shifts your way of being. Are there any in your life that you have that you would live for or die on behalf of?
Oh, absolutely. So first of all, if you threatened anybody in my family, I would die immediately. If I had to, I mean, they're just, and particularly at my age now, it's like, what the hell? You have that much money? Come on. But no, there are things that I just, that are, if I think it's more important. What are the things I want to live for? Like for example, if we're all interested in these spiritual things, Jeffrey, why have you spent the last 40 years in tech? Right? I mean, how spiritual do you think really tech is? But so my rational, I don't know if it's a rationalization. The narrative I create around that is, I think technology is a force, can be a force for good in the world. I think it's also a source of excellent employment. I think it creates surplus revenue that you can use to fund social justice. So I have lots of reasons to want to do it. And so for me, and this is, I think, true of any narrative, you put your life in service to the narrative. So whatever it is, and then you put yourself out in the world in service to that narrative. And what happens is the people who are interested in that narrative and who are part of that narrative will come toward you because you're bringing as much of a gift as you can. The people that are not part of the narrative ignore you, so that's fine. They go the other way, and as a result, you are able to accomplish so much more because you're getting leverage from these secondary sources of help, and it's really important because if you don't do that, if you say, no, I'm going to put myself out there for me, or I want to make my thing happen, and all you're thinking about is what you're trying to do, then the world at its best will kind of say, okay, I mean, they'll give you freedom of movement. Often they won't, by the way. But what they will never do is say, I will go out of my way to make you successful. And the world has gone out of its way to make me successful. I mean, in phenomenal ways, just absurd. I mean, just all the time. So, and it pays me a stupid amount of money to do that. I was just crazy. So it's a good strategy for living.
It's a good strategy. And for what it's worth, I really appreciate the narrative of technology being an enabler. I bless your self-narrative, but just because when I think about that aspect of a culture that can do the impossible when it comes to our nature and bring the abstract and out there demise of our species closer to home and make it feel immediate so that we deal with it, which is sort of not that synchronous with who we are as animals, but has to happen or we won't survive. So we might just be at our end or we might just get it together.
Yeah.
For me, the only bridge that can bring it closer is technology. It's going to make it visible. It's going to make it measurable. It's going to make it manageable. Okay, bringing us, perfect segue, to mortality. To the end that is not as a result of climate, hopefully. You talk about these 5 questions, and I love the 5 questions. And by the way, I want to run our Wildcat offsite based on the 5 questions. Why not, right? It's just like, what are our goals? What do we really... So I'd love you to walk us through the 5 questions. And then I'd love to hear a little bit about any tools that you could offer us for how to get closest to our answers. Because the questions are intuitive. Yeah. Just a spoiler alert. They feel intuitive and right, and I like the sequencing and the order of them. But the how do I get to the right answer? Yeah. was where I was left.
Okay. Well, fair enough. And maybe that's called living out the rest of your life.
That's right.
But so the chapter on mortality, by the way, which is my favorite chapter in the book, because first of all, we've all lost people, and we all I've never heard a narrative of immortality that I thought was credible. And by the way, if it was credible, it would scare the hell out of me, because I get bored in a 3-hour football game. So if you say I had to live for eternity, it's the most terrifying thing you could say to me, possibly. I'm not designed for eternity, for sure. But still, mortality, evolution, by the way, selects for people that are afraid of death and flee death. That's how you stay alive. So the fact that we are afraid of death is actually our Darwinian heritage. I mean, it's how you get there. But you have to make your peace with death, right? So the first thing I was trying to say is, does Darwinism say anything about death that would help? So here's the catechism I came up with. Darwinism is based on the fact that of evolution. And evolution is based on natural selection. And natural selection is based on life and death experiences. So if there's no death, there's no natural selection. If there's no natural selection, there's no evolution. If there's no evolution, we're back to the gunk. Right? I mean, we aren't here. Nothing. This room, nothing. Everybody we love, everything we care about, every food, every person. None of it exists. It can't exist. It can only exist through natural selection, which means death is an enabler. So the point about that was, look, doesn't do anything about your issues with death because they're still there. But you can't repudiate it. It's like how we got here, right? I mean, come on. So you got to make your peace with that. So that was number one.
You got to maybe thank it. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm still a little afraid of you, but thank you.
Yeah, exactly. Because I'm glad to be here. I'm glad. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing this, right? Okay, so that was good. But so then the next thing was, okay, but now how do you deal with that? And there was I read a book called the chapter's called Being Mortal, and there's a book called Being Mortal by a doctor named Atul Gawande. And he was talking about hospice. He was talking about how to deal with the phase of life where you're actually now fighting a rearguard action against imminent death. And it's a very challenging time for families. If you're a doctor, you're thrown right into the middle of that. And he said he developed a set of 5 questions that he felt if you could get these questions settled, it just makes the whole journey better for everybody. And so the first one, and it's primarily directed to the patient. Do you know what is happening to you? And do you know what your options are? So that's a really important thing. The second one then is, what are your fears and what are your hopes? And the third one, I think I've got this right, is what goals do you have within that limit? I'm going to forget 4 and 5 too. And then the fourth one is, the fifth one is, are you acting in accordance with what you said? Right. But I'm missing one in the middle here. But the point about those questions they were designed to say, okay, the time you have left you is I think the fourth one was something like, what trade-offs are you willing to make?
Yes.
Which is a really important one. Okay.
Really powerful idea.
Because he had this wonderful example where he's talking about his father, I think his father, who is in the hospice. And when he says to his dad, what are you not willing to, at what point would you say enough's enough? And he said, if I couldn't watch a baseball game and eat ice cream. I'm already in love with his dad. It's like, yeah, okay. But note this up. I need to rewrite my medical directive. Ice cream. I'm not sure about baseball. I probably would put in golf, and that'd be me. But so then when I was looking at those questions, I thought, well, what if you asked those questions earlier? So I'm 75. So I thought about 75. Okay. So in football terms, fourth quarter, right? Maybe, certainly halftime's in the rearview mirror here, people. But I still feel, I had this metaphor of the aging athlete, a Tom Brady-like figure who's like, okay, there are a bunch of kids on the field that are now more athletic than I am, but I know the game pretty good. I can
play.
Or
Y.A. Tittle.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, thank you very much. There you go. Okay, Y.A. Tittle. For those of you, both the San Francisco 49er and a New York Giant quarterback back in the day. But anyway, I want to. So, what do you want to do? I mean, where are you at that point? Fourth quarter, plenty of time on the clock. You're not in hospital. You're healthy. In fact, arguably, maybe at the height of your powers, depending on what you do.
Right.
So now what? How do you play this game? And so what I thought about was, look, you want, at least in my view, I wanted to play for legacy and impact. I said, look, I want to be part of the story. The story was going on before I got here. The story is going to keep going after I leave. I'd like to be part of the story. I'd like to be a memorable part of the story in some way. Okay, great. So you have any ideas about that? Yeah, I've got a bunch of ideas about that, including writing this book, right? So that's great. So then the question is, okay, but are you doing it? So the first question is, do you know what's happening to you? And do you know what your options are? So that was arguably the first 2/3 of the book is trying to explain what's happening to us with the staircase and what our options are, right? Mm-hmm. Then the second question was, what are what are your hopes and fears? The second one,
I think so.
I think that's the second one. One's related to goals, or maybe I can't remember which is goals or which is one. But then the idea would be, okay, what are your hopes and fears at 75 going forward? What are your hopes and what are you worried about? And for me, I think largely that said, look, I want to make an impact, and my fear would be I wasted my time. It's like, man, I just spent too much time doing the same, playing video games on an iPhone, right? It's like, really? That's what you did? I mean, ouch. Okay. So then the idea is, well, what goals? And so I set in my case, I'm really interested, and the goals I'm interested in are, in addition to writing this book, I want to write a book about teaching and writing. I want to do some stuff on literary criticism. This is going back to my roots. But I have family goals. I have 2 grandchildren I want to see, as far as I can. I want to be a part of their life as much as I can. Maria and I have been married for 53 years. We're just getting started on this relationship. So I need as much time as I could get working on that one. It's just such a joy. And then we have 3 kids and 2 in-laws. And there's so much of the family thing I care about. Then there's this firm that we're involved with. I care about it. There's all my client firms, I care about them. So there's a bunch of stuff I really care about. So then the idea is, okay, so what you realize is you want to get more of your energy and lifetime spent on the things that matter, which means you have to start extracting yourself from the things that don't matter. Right. And you say, well, that shouldn't be hard. But the truth is, it's really hard. And it's really hard in part because you are complicit in creating those spheres of work. And there's a whole routine that routinely engages you. And by the way, there's this kind of a comforting, reassuring part of that. But it's like you're going, man, that's not the best return on my capital. And if you're thinking about return on invested capital, which we were supposed to do, it's like, okay. And so all at the margin, I think what you want to do with the Being Mortal chapter is say, look, try to maximize return on invested capital where it's your human capital that you're investing. Think about where you could put it. And the point I wanted to make was getting back to legacy and impact. Legacy and impact, everybody can have impact if you focus enough. I always call it the fish to pond ratio. You could always be a big fish if you find a small enough pond, right? So figure out your fish to pond ratio and say, okay, I can have an impact there. And I'm going to donate my time there, I'm going to, my energy, whatever it is, and I want to have an impact there. And then you say, okay, so then I want to make sure I give a disproportionate amount of my time to that. I'm still going to have a bunch diffuse into other things. That's part of being a citizen in the world and a real person. That's okay. But what I don't want to do, and this is back to Stephen Covey, where he always talked about how the urgent displaces the important. Yeah. So the nice thing about getting older is it's like, you get to pull the AARP card out and go, time for important people. Right. And the urgent things, and then you deal with the urgent. I'm going to deal with the important. And so you get to do that.
And you make such a compelling point to bring that forward. There's maybe back to our human nature where we only we serve the emergency that's in front of us. In our fourth quarter, it makes sense that everybody's doing this return on invested capital calculus for what remains. Yeah. But if you could just do that calculation earlier and earlier.
Anytime you want. Now, I did say Being Mortal, I said, I felt like, first of all, there's a time to be immortal. I mean, like when you're...
I loved that. I felt like it was such a relief. Yeah, I wasn't responsible for thinking about it.
Exactly. At some point, and then there's a time to be adult, which is neither mortal nor immortal. It's just like, oh God, I just got to
deliver.
I got to deliver, right? I got to step up here. But then at some point, and I think it is I think it has to be in the second half, because I think all of a sudden you think, okay, we are playing a game that has a clock. And so you go, okay, I got to think about this a little bit differently. But when you do, then I do think pulling that forward and just starting to reshape your life and make sure that you're not frittering away, because it's so easy to do. It's so easy to do.
It's so easy to do. Do you have any tricks for how to do that? Just any tools that you've turned to over the course of a given day where you pick up your phone? I'm guessing you aren't actually that attracted to the iPhone games.
I'm not.
But so that's not really your temptation. But is there anything?
Well, actually, to be fair, but to be fair, there are 2 games that I will play. It is literally just mind candy. There's a game of solitaire called Free Cell, and there is a word game called Wordscape. And I probably in both games the infinite player of them. But that literally
You've lost a few
that
hours
literally
there.
is to be mindless. I mean that is
And there's a case to be made that that is in service of your later mindfulness.
Well, in fact, when I'm writing this book or anything, I will go back and forth between, because you get intense, then you say I need to pull away. But I would say the biggest phrase I think about, it's the two words that help me the most are being in service to, so that I continually say, because I just feel obligated. It's like, man, you well, if you're given a bunch of stuff, you got to give back. I mean, come on. Right. So I continually have that sort of sense, and that really does help. So when I build my plan for the week, I'll have first of all, I'll look at my calendar. I'll think, okay, all the things I got to do. But then I'll also have the thing about where are we with, the bigger thing. I do this, Salesforce has this methodology called V2 MOM, vision, values, methods, obstacles, and measures. And about 5 or 6 years ago, I said, well, I think I'll start doing that for my business. So for a couple of years, I did it for my business. It's very useful. The last few years, I've done it for my life. It's like, okay, dude, come on. Vision, values, methods, obstacles, measures. And so that is helpful.
Wow.
Because then you and you take it out, I don't know, 5 times a year. It's not like tattooed on the inside of your wrist, but you go, how am I doing? Where are we? And you have to have measures. I mean, the measures is a really key thing. So it's like, well, what are you doing? So I think that helps in terms of doing that. So anyway.
All right. Well, the word mom brought me to my favorite and final question, which is you make an incredibly compelling and articulate case for acknowledging the nurturing that occurs in all of our lives, and that it serves as the foundation for our later creation of narrative morality. It really is the basis for everything. And you said, but what's ironic, and I wish I could have found the section just now, you look at all these great philosophers and all of these people who've had dramatic impact, and they don't thank their origin, they don't thank their mom. So I wanted to give you an opportunity.
There's a line in there about aspiring philosophers, remember your... Yeah, because, well, look, I mean, and if you think about how we develop, I mean, like, who taught you to speak? I mean, come on. And who kind of listened to you when you sort of garbled out these whatever ideas you had? And who, I mean, you get so much encouragement early on. Now, not to be fair, there are moms and there are moms. I mean, there are moms that are no fun.
And you made an amazing case that the mom role can be filled by
anybody,
men, women,
right. But you have
caregivers.
to get, By the way, there are people who there's that horrible generation in Romania that did not get nurtured. Right. Horrific outcome. Right. So if you're leading a balance, somebody nurtured you, and so it's your nurturer kind of thing doing that. In my case, my mom was. I just every time I think about her, I smile because it's largely from my child. It's a child smile because she was just like the best thing in my life, and part of it was she was funny, and she teased. She wasn't a chump. She wasn't easy, and she loved literature and she loved words, and I was really good at words, and I was really good at and so it just. And she did. I mean, honest to God, I mean, I was such a smart ass little guy. I think about how many sort of pontificating things I said to my mom, explaining to her, as if she was maybe just vestigially intelligent.
That's right.
and I was, of course, explaining everything to her, and she listened, and it was just. It was really good, so really nice.
Oh, that's wonderful. All right, well, inspired by Kelly, she suggested that I pull a Brené Brown on you and ask you a couple rapid fire questions.
Well, let's see what happens.
So, I can only remember 4 of, I think, her standard 5, but I'm going to try. Your favorite meal?
Well, if I'm home, it's damn near anything Marie cooks because she cooks just really. I would say we have last dinner. Maybe her Boeuf Bourguignon, possibly. I'm just guessing though, because there's so many good ones. If I'm going out, Nobu.
Okay.
Nobu.
Can't go wrong. What is on your bedstand right now?
My Kindle and an alarm clock. And my Kindle has 700 books on it.
Of course it
Because, well, including all the hodgepodge.
Each of which are represented in
all
here.
those hodgepodge and that stuff. But I read a bunch of, so my Mind Candy is historical mysteries. They're these series that they're just like Private Eye series, except they're set in other eras. And then there's always 2 or 3 books like this book on it. So I'm reading
Breaking Your Brain.
Yeah, this was the end of the universe as we know it, astrophysically speaking, by Katie Mack. By the way, which is she's a wonderful writer. That was really good. This one called Fundamentals is another one I'm reading right now.
Oh, that's great fun. And what is your greatest fear?
Losing any. I'm starting with Marie, but losing anybody close to me, just because I've never really. I mean, I've lost my parents and my grandparents, but in time, but somebody like that close, it just, yeah.
And what brings you your greatest joys during the day? Oh, a daily joy.
No, we won't talk about some of those Natalie joys. I think right now it's watching a grandchild sort of just discover the world. I mean, and by the way, we have 2 we see on Zoom once a week. But the truth is, any kid under the age of X, and X is probably 7, just watching that kid discover stuff, just whatever it is, or prance around or wear something, whatever it is. It's just like, yes.
More of that, please.
Yeah, give me, exactly. Yeah, bring that one. Yeah. Bring me
I might need a dose every hour.
Several helpings of that would be good. The endorphins are working. Yeah, exactly.
That's wonderful. Jeffrey, I cannot thank you enough for being so open and vulnerable and creative and being willing to talk about this with me.
Thank you for being my Charlie Rose.
It was great fun. It was a true honor.
Well, thanks a lot. Great.